Welcome to the workshop on language and political organising. I can't actually find the title of the workshop here. I had it in front of me a moment ago, it's gone. Anyway, my name's Kate Wilson and I'm going to introduce the session. I would like to thank ORFC for including this workshop in their program because, I mean, we feel it's a very important issue, but it's one that's often marginalized in political organizing processes. And I guess we're here to talk about why it's important and why, and the sorts of things that we've learned over the years of working around this issue. To introduce us, I'm Kate, as I said. I'm from Coati, which is a collective that works with alternative interpreting technologies. Isa is going to speak after me. She was from the Via Campesina International Operational Secretariat, and she was an organizer of international events. And Lucia is the title of the workshop is Language Justice. There is no revolution without translation. Thank you. So Lucia is a professional conference interpreter who is also a regular volunteer at Via Campesina events. So the three of us met through organizing language, working around language issues through Via Campesina. And for those of you who don't know what Via Campesina is, it's an international network of peasant farmers organizations. And I'll let Lisa say a little bit more about it, but it has an organizing rhythm of 2 yearly international conferences. They have a big international conference every 4 years, and then in between, so every 2 years, a midterm conference, which bring together peasant farmers organizations from all over the world, speaking many different languages, to organize and coordinate struggles for peasant farmers around the world. And those meetings take place in a different country and a different continent each time, and pose some significant challenges in terms of grassroots organizing. Most big international gatherings take place in what people think of as the more international languages, like English or Spanish or French. Many people speak these languages around the world because they have long and quite brutal histories of imperialism and colonization. And these languages were forcibly imposed on people from many different cultures. But not everybody speaks these languages. And people from less dominant cultures often get excluded from participating in these kind of political organizing meetings. People who are contributing in a language that's not their first language are often reluctant to contribute because they feel uncomfortable about expressing themselves. They might be unsure if they've understood everything correctly. And even when people participate through interpreters, and I'm probably talking too fast, they're often not able to fully participate because speakers speak too fast and information gets lost, because there may be a delay in the interpreting. And so people who aren't native speakers of the more dominant languages are often placed at a disadvantage, and international meetings are very often dominated by the people who are native speakers of languages, particularly English, who have dominated history, and they continue to dominate our political organizing spaces. Even when a single language is being spoken in a meeting, so if everybody in the meeting speaks English, the words that are used and the way that you talk also create power dynamics. And I'm from Britain, and within Britain, accents are a very strong marker of social class. And highly academic language and jargon is often used to exclude even native speakers of a language from spaces. So We make political decisions with the languages that we use and with the words that we use. Some languages like Spanish and French have a heavy gender element within the language. Other words have very important political significance. I remember the decision that was made within Via Campesina to use the word peasant farmers and the word peasant with pride, and to get past the negative connotations that Anglo-Saxon cultures have given to that word. And basically, all of those things add up to language being about power. And if we believe in grassroots organizing and horizontal organizing, then we're committing to working across those language barriers. And it becomes an important political struggle to increase the equality of our communication and create space for people who don't speak the dominant languages to participate on an equal basis. So like I said, Isa, Lucia, and I met as part of that process and as part of that struggle, and we've been working together on and off for 15 years, and we're here to talk a little bit about what we've learned in that process. And Isa is going to start by talking about how language became an issue originally within Via Campesina.
Okay, good afternoon. Thanks, Kate. And thanks everybody to pay attention to this issue, because it's an issue that we find very important and that usually slip all the programs and the debates on social organizing and on farmers' issues as well when we talk about international movements. So I will talk a bit like a story about my experience within Via Campesina, but I'm not working with Via Campesina anymore. So I started my time as an organizer and in charge of communication for the farmers movement in 2005. And I really, my first days of work were in Hong Kong, where farmers were organizing mass protests against the WTO. And there were like more than 2,000 farmers in the streets, mainly from Korea, but also from all parts of the world, from Latin America, from Europe, from everywhere, from Africa. And so it was quite a challenging time in terms of everything, political time, but also in terms of communication. At that time, we did not have social media. We had emails and websites and mainstream media. And mainstream media were portraying us as terrorists invading Hong Kong, right? And so it was very important to have our own channel of communication and to be able to really explain to the world what we were doing there and why farmers felt so marginalized in a system where free trade is really pushed, like it was happening in the WTO and still is. So we had to almost improvise our communication system. So we had a new website, half working, but it did work, and we had email lists. We were squatting a small office with the informal workers, and we were raided by the police every other day. So there was no point in starting making translations in the office, right? We were running from the police station, from the mass protest, the media was there on our back, so we could not translate anything. But there was a demand from all the movement around the world towards us to show what we were doing, right? So we had a few contacts, bilateral contacts with volunteer translators. And we put them all in a group, in a mailing list. They were somewhere in Madrid, in New York, in Brazil, everywhere. And we had maybe 5 names, and we just put them in a list because we could not handle bilateral conversations. And every day, when we were finishing the day, we would send a press release or a testimony or something. And during the night, for us, they would just send us back the translation. And they started with a very small group, and people got so excited that more people joined that group, and we were just accepting everyone in this mailing list, and it was magic, because at some point we needed translation from Korean to Mandarin, and someone just volunteered, I can do it. So it was a bit incredible, but and it allowed us to produce material, not top quality language material, but every day we could inform the movement and also the media who were interested about what was going on, and mainly what were the real reason why people were there, because otherwise the news is more like the protest and the chaos, but not the reason why we were there. So here I want to insist of the role of this work of translations and communications, because it's our only way to control our language and the message that we send out, right? So after this time, challenging events where all the farmers were put in jail for one night and all that, well, we went back home, and everyone in the movement got very aware that with a good network of translators, we could really advance much better, right? And so the first thing we did was to consolidate this group of translators. And in case you are in organizing, I really encourage you to work with translators as a group and not individuals, because as organizers, you cannot maintain a rhythm with bilateral contacts like that. And also it creates a dynamic between people start self-organizing themselves. And so you are not the one to say, no, you do it, no, you do it better. No, people volunteer on the mailing list, and it gets some, also you feel less lonely when you translate in your little house somewhere. You feel others are active, and also you feel less guilty to say no, because actually you never say no. You only say yes when you want to volunteer. But otherwise, if I ask you, please, Lucia, translate that to me, you will do it, but maybe you have no time. And so there is a kind of pressure which we don't want to put in this collective work. So all this work was on a voluntary basis, like all farmers were on the street, of course, on a voluntary basis, and some people were professional translators, some were not, and it just flowed, right? And now I think in the Via Campesina teams there are maybe 200 volunteers who translate daily texts from different languages to other different languages, right? The movement could not work without this very strong basis of translators. So when I talk about translators, is some people doing the translation, the written translation, press releases, articles, program conferences, and all this. But then we also had to organize interpretation, which is like the live translation. When you are in a conference, there is someone, like I think it's happening now, someone who is listening to what I say and translating it in my native language, which is French, and in Spanish or something. That was another thing to organize, because it gets very technical to organize teams of interpreters. We tend to think, okay, we need 4 interpreters because we have 4 languages. And so we would just recruit volunteers who want to travel, and we say, oh yes, please come. And then we realize that they speak the language that are not used in the meeting. So there are many technical things about organizing interpreters team, and also many limitations that we don't know when we are not an interpreter. I'm not an interpreter, and I did not really understand that the interpreters need to take breaks after 30 minutes, for example. Otherwise, the brain kind of melts, right? And it's not bad will. It's not that they are just spoiled or anything. It's just that it does not work. Then the quality of the interpretation goes down, and it's just physically not possible. But as organizer, we think they should work 12 hours a day like us, and So we had a lot of learning to do, and that's part of the process that happened with Kate and Lucia and other people, is that we had to learn to understand what's the reality of having different languages interpreted. So we did organize the same way, the teams of interpreters for events. Kate explained that there were two main conferences one conference, big conference every 2 years, but there were many other events, many other workshops, mobilizations, and so we had to organize that on an ongoing basis. We did different things, and we tried things, and we failed on some things as well. At the beginning, Via Campesina worked with volunteers that were very activist, and for them it was very important to tell what they thought during the interpretation process. So they would say, okay, this woman from India said that, but I don't agree, and I would recommend you to do that. And so it became politically very messy, because it's already very messy to organize a political voice between people from different continents with different realities. And so there was a bit of, so with those bad experience, I think Via Campesina started working with professional translators, but that's also difficult because they would never sustain the rhythm, they would not understand what we're doing, and it was so expensive that we could not do it, right? And so we started working with the new groups of volunteers and trying to set up the rules, right? And I think Kate or Lucia will explain a bit more politically what it takes to be an activist and an interpreter, right? Which is complex. We also had to work with our own groups, because interpreters, like, it's not because they are volunteers that it's a free service that we can treat badly. So we really had to say that this group of interpreters were there to support us, and it's also their political contribution to the movement, and that the only thing we can do to help them doing a good job is respecting a bit the limitation, which is, for example, we should not speak too fast. We should take breaks. We should not grab them at lunch, at every, like when we are brushing our teeth, we ask, hey, Kate, tell her that, and so there are things that we had to learn. Otherwise, we would kind of grab them and overuse their skills, right? I hope also Kate and Lucia will explain a bit more how themselves, the interpreters organized themselves and created a group in itself that was this collective supporting the farmers movement. So our commitment to the movement from the Secretariat, I was part of the Secretariat, was to provide translations and interpretations in 3 languages. And for me, it was already a huge challenge to have everything in Spanish, English, and French. And for many years, I resisted to let other languages enter the room because I thought I would explode, right? I was under a strong lobby here present that will explain a bit why they pushed for more languages, and also how they managed to do it. But all in all, at the end, we were, well, now the movement is able to organize huge conferences with 600 people, and how many languages? Maybe 30. Yeah, so I finish here and I let Lucia take over.
Yeah, I'm Lucia, and I'm going to speak about. There's some echo. I'm going to speak about how we got to let other languages enter, because as Isabel said, at some point the conferences at La Via Campesina were really like highly professional. I mean, there was a lot of people, and through independent technology providers, we had achieved a level of professionalism that was very high, with booths and quite was quite cozy, like as an interpreter. And this only held for like majority languages, like English or Spanish or French. And occasionally, when we got to a concrete place, like for example Mali, would also have interpreting into Bambara, because it was the language, the local language that was spoken by the majority of people that were present. But still, we realized that we wanted to be inclusive, but we were only providing this very limited interpreting, and that wasn't enough, because there were movements from all over the world that were sending delegates to meetings, and those delegates didn't speak either of these languages. So often they came with one member of staff that was also to serve as an interpreter, and this member of staff had to work as a staff member and do all his administrative tasks or whatever. And on top of that, he had to work for the leader or the delegate as an interpreter nonstop and all by himself. And as Isabel said, the brain of an interpreter tends to melt after 30 minutes. So you can see how this was not a good idea. I actually don't understand how it was going on for so long like that. But we at some point we thought also that this could not go on, and it might have seemed a detail, because all in all things were going all right, and people got to understand each other more or less. But we saw that, for example, these interpreters from, let's say, Korean, or the language that was not majoritary in the conference, they tended to work in a different dynamic as well, since their interpreters were not official interpreters. For example, the people would not speak to the room, and then the room would hear the interpretation from the interpreter. Instead of that, they would whisper into their interpreter's ears, and then the interpreter would tell us what they had said. So we never got to listen to their voices. And for some people it might seem a detail, but for us it was really symbolic and important. And this happened even for people that were leaders in the movement. So at some point we decided that we had to do something about that, and that started with improving the working conditions of the interpreters, just for humane reasons. So we started asking elementary humanitarianism. We started asking the delegations to send more than one interpreter, and also dedicated interpreters. I mean, not some member of staff that was to do his work or her work as staff and also interpret. And also we asked if these people could have some experience as interpreters. That was optional, but also helped. And we also asked them to put them in contact with us prior to the conferences, so that we could involve them in the team and give them also wireless technology if they didn't have any, because this might seem trivial, but it's not. I mean, if you have the proper equipment to work for your delegate, you're going to do a much better job if you get a floor line, and also if you don't have to whisper all the time in his ear. That's also very uncomfortable, because you have to be physically near to your customer all the time, which is also limiting. And these kind of things kind of improved their living conditions. And also, the moment this thing started working like that, the interpreters, professional or not professional interpreters, they became real interpreters. They were not staff that was acting as an interpreter anymore. And also the dynamic changed. And these people whose voices we had never heard before started talking to the room and then letting their interpreters interpret them. And this really brought a change in the way these people participated in the meetings, because they spoke more often, because they saw it was easy to do, and it became normalized. I mean, they didn't feel guilty anymore because they were kind of intruding with their minority language. It became a normal thing to speak a different language. And that was like a change of paradigm that was very important from my point of view. And I don't know, also their message got very much more understandable because the interpreters were not so tired, and it was two of them, and they had proper technology. So all in all, like that, I mean, the ideal thing would be to have 30 booths with the 30 languages, but that's obviously not possible, and it's not going to be, because if we had to wait for that to happen, we would never do anything. But this has become like a compromise, and also it's negotiated every time. For example, if there's a free booth, we are going to go and look for an interpreter of one of these languages and put him or her in the booth so that they work. I mean, it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of care, but it's what we do is a lot about care. And if we stop caring for these kind of things, well, it isn't worth doing it anymore. It's what I think. And well, that about minority languages. And I was also asked to speak about how we balance the dynamic of working with professional and non-professional interpreters, and what this whole volunteering as an interpreter also gives to you as a professional, because I'm a professional interpreter. But I was not a professional interpreter when I first started working with La Via Campesina. I was 24 years old. I had finished a degree in translating and interpreting, and I didn't really want to be an interpreter, because I thought interpreters were vain people that only cared about money and little more, and I really didn't see the attractive of it. It's a fun thing to do, to interpret, but there wasn't anything for me in it. But when in 2007 I was asked to go to Nileni to work with La Via Campesina, I saw that it was really possible to help people communicate. And it's obvious that that's what you do as an interpreter. But for me, it wasn't. And also, it was the kind of things that I heard, and the kind of messages that I helped convey that really told me that was something that I wanted to do. Also, when starting to work with La Via Campesina, I saw that I ranked more or less as a professional interpreter there, because there were a lot of people that had not even studied translation as I had. But what I could observe as well is that a lot of people that came to be interpreters because they were activists and spoke several languages had a lot of things that as a trained interpreter you didn't have, because they knew the subjects, they knew what politically was really at stake at some points, whereas someone that didn't know the movement, maybe for them it was difficult to see. And throughout many conferences, I've seen that sometimes we have tended to work more with activists and sometimes more with professional interpreters, and at the end we have seen that probably balancing the two of them is like the best solution, because also the interpreters, as Isabel told us the other day, like the interpreter room is the place to be, because they tend to form like a kind of strange collective, informal thing, and they speak. Interpreters talk a lot, as you can see, and very fast, I guess, and they tend to exchange a lot of experiences. And for me, it was really enriching to be able to work with people that came from different contexts and that could explain so many things to me, and could explain to me why I had to use this word and not that other word. Whereas I was able to explain like a lot of little tricks that, as a translator that works a lot with languages, you have like in your sleeve, and that are come naturally to you, but maybe not to a person that doesn't work in that. So there's really a lot of potential for enriching a team through combining both kind of interpreters. And I also wanted to say that as an interpreter, as a trained interpreter, for me, it has been really vital that I came to find LVC in my path. First, because I wouldn't have become an interpreter otherwise, but also because when I got used to work in such difficult contexts, and it was so much worth it that I really think that it has given me a different life as an interpreter. I remember once I arrived in Hokkaido for a G8, and I had missed a plane somewhere in Osaka or something like that. Not my fault. It was not my fault, entirely not. But I arrived after 2 days of traveling, and when I arrived at the airport, there was no one there because, well, my flight was due like 2 days late, 2 days before. So and when I arrived, I found someone, and at some point I saw an LBC banner somewhere, and I went there, and I was told that we were in the airport, and we were to stay in the airport for the whole night, maybe because the Koreans had been retained, and they didn't let them in the country because they feared that they would cause trouble in the G8 protests or whatever. And I remember thinking, but these people are crazy. I need to leave. And in the moment, it seemed really awful to me. But first of all, I saw the necessity of staying there and protesting until the Koreans got let into Japan, which they were never let in. They had to go back to Korea, which shame on them. Not on the Koreans, on the Japanese. But after that, really, after going to interpret the next day without having slept, I really tend to be very, very resilient with working conditions. And whenever I know that there's so much at stake, and that the priority is not really my immediate comfort, I can go for it. And this is something that is not obvious for any interpreters. I have to state that very clearly, because interpreters tend to be very squeamish. And that's it. So I think it was really enriching for me, and it's really enriching for any interpreter to work with social movements. So thank you.
Okay, so I came to interpreting with Via Campesina. I wasn't an interpreter. I hadn't studied translation or interpreting. I was an anarchist and environmental activist, and I spoke English and Spanish, and so ended up often volunteering to help people who couldn't understand what was going on in the meetings to interpret. And I ended up volunteering with Via Campesina at some point. I can't even remember when. As an emergency stand-in. A friend of mine called me and said, one of our interpreters has dropped out. Can you go to Norway to interpret this meeting? Like in 2 days' time. And I did. And in 2008, I ended up coordinating the interpreting team for a huge international conference in Mozambique, the Via Campesina 5th International Conference. And as part of that, I spent a lot of time talking with Isa and other people from Via Campesina about the political issues that Isa talked about of activists like myself with quite strong political opinions acting as the interpreters, and the importance of impartiality and the importance of leaving our politics at the door. Because the people you are facilitating communication between two people who have the right to make their own decisions and communicate with each other directly without the political opinions of the person in the middle influencing that communication. And one of the things that we did was we set up a separate political collective that could work as an ally with Via Campesina and with other movements that we worked with, without saying we were part of that movement, or without people feeling that we had a right to influence the political decisions that were being made. I mean, in Via Campesina, it's very stark, because the political position of Via Campesina is that it's a movement of peasant farmers, for peasant farmers, by peasant farmers. So interpreters like myself. I'm not a farmer. I'm born and raised in the city, and I can barely garden. I have no right to be influencing the decisions that are being made in those spaces. And because we set up this this separate political collective that was specifically working on the issue of language, it became something that we thought about a lot, and how language and interpretation could facilitate participation. And as interpreting became a more established part of these political processes, it became really clear that technology was a limiting factor. So the conference interpreting technology is prohibitively expensive, and is a massive limit on the resources. Isa mentioned this before, like the need to limit the number of languages that we were interpreting in, because it's such a massive drain on the resources of an event or of a movement. But also we began to realize that the technical choices that we were making were also political choices. There's no such thing as a purely technical choice. And even if you have the funds, if you have the budget to pay for commercial services, if you pay a commercial company, you give them the money, it's a one-off thing. And that a better political alternative would be to invest in the people and the equipment and the capacity for the movement going forward into the future. And one of the things that we also realized was that how the technology and the interpreting is set up has significant implications for the dynamics of a meeting and the participatory nature of a meeting. And that a lot of, when you're working with multiple languages, a lot of the things that we think we know about inclusivity and participation maybe work a little bit differently. So, for example, I forgot to mention in the introduction that my native language is English, but Lucia's native language is Spanish and Isa's native language is French. And we did consider doing this workshop in all three languages to make an important point about how people should be able to express themselves in their native language.
Not only to make an important point, it's just that I would feel more comfortable speaking Spanish for obvious reasons.
Yeah. But there are technical constraints and constraints around people's participation in the meeting that mean, for example, interpreting is much easier to set up in a large plenary session with a few people speaking from a podium and most people just listening. And participatory organizing uses a lot of small working groups where people have the opportunity to contribute and talk to each other more directly, but that massively multiplies the interpreting resources required to ensure that everybody can participate equally. And so the decisions that you make about the interpreting and the resources that you have for interpreting will affect working dynamics of an event and how inclusive or exclusive it is. So over the years, there have been a number of experiments in creating our own interpreting technologies. And in 2009, we set up COATI, the collective for autogestión, for self-organization of interpreting technologies, we were a collective that was basically committed to reinvesting the costs of interpreting technology into designing and building and operating in alternatives for the social movement, and working with organizations and training people to build the capacity of the social movements to have their own technological solutions for conferences. And Isa mentioned that both Lucia and I have been a powerful lobby group in her life for introducing minority languages. So one of the commitments that we made as a collective was working within the budget limitations of Via Campesina and working with the regional interpreters to create basically accessible, cheap solutions to solve the technical problems and create more equality for the minority languages. So we looked at ways of maximizing the possibilities for people to participate directly in small groups, and we made a point of providing technical equipment and facilities for there to be simultaneous translations in languages other than English and French. An important part of that was providing what we call relay facilities. So if a speaker is speaking Korean, for example, to the room, the Korean interpreter will probably translate that into English, and the Spanish interpreter doesn't understand Korean in most cases. The French interpreter doesn't understand Korean. So providing the facility for the other interpreters into other languages to listen to that English translation and then translate that simultaneously into the other language. And also the training of the interpreters and building their confidence to go into the interpreting booths and do the simultaneous interpreting instead of the consecutive interpreting sat together with their delegate whispering that they had been doing before. And a lot of that was working with very, very limited equipment and resources. Because, as I said, the Via Campesina conferences happen in many, many different countries around the world. And a major issue for us with the technology has been the question of import and export and transport of the equipment and having to minimize the amount of equipment that we are using. But the culmination, the crowning moment of that project of expanding the space for minority languages was the recent, I think it was 2017, the Via Campesina International Conference that took place in Bilbao. And because it was in Bilbao, we were effectively playing at home. We had no expensive transport costs, no labor-intensive import-export processes, and we were able to just pack all our equipment into our own van and drive across the country and basically have all the toys to do the things that we wanted to do. And at that conference, we had 14 languages running simultaneously in the plenary session, with people intervening from the floor in Spanish, English, and French, of course, but also in Basque, in Arabic, in Russian, in Indonesian, in Korean. I can't even remember. We had a massive list of the languages that had spoken in the plenary. And that experience was a massive eye-opener for a lot of people, and there were articles written about it, and this rallying cry of "without interpretation there is no revolution" became something that you started to hear all over the place. And I think, I don't know what happens next. I mean, the pandemic has kind of stopped all the in-person conferences from happening at the moment. So in terms of technology, we're all having to adapt. This is my first time giving a talk interpreted online. And some other people from the Coati Collective are working with the organizers of this event on the interpreting. And I don't really know where it's going to go next, but I think that it's important to think about the technology. And I think that was everything we wanted to talk about. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we've got a lot of questions.
Yeah, I've tried to look at them. There are some questions really for interpreters. That I will. I found 3 of them that I will tell you later. Maybe I start with 2 others. One is about body language, and what are our thoughts about the importance of body language to communicate enthusiasm and passion. I think it's there is something to say about how we saw some people really emerging when they could speak their own language, even if we were used to listen to them, but in bad English or in some through a translator. So I don't know if one of you, Kate or Lucia, have an example in mind, but just to show how important it is to see the person speaking their own language and to hear the sound of the language and to see their faces when they really say what they want to say. If there is no example.
I think there were many examples of people that we saw who used to, as Lucia said, whisper to their interpreter what they were saying, and then that would be the voice that you would hear in the room was the voice of the interpreter, and seeing those people speaking and knowing that they were being heard, even though they were speaking a language that was not the one they, you know what I mean, they were being listened to in other languages, but knowing that they were being heard directly, it made a massive difference to people's participation.
In terms of pride as well, right? Like people are proud to speak their own language, and if our role was really to promote the farmer's voice, and it was crazy that we actually put another voice on the top of the voice, right? So, so I was convinced by the lobby for the multi-language thing. There was a comment question: how can farmers get the respect of academics? The fact they say that those who can do, those who can't teach. Yeah, this is something I would like to respond about, because actually we saw that the farmers spoke much better than academics, and also in all this process, some farmers became translators and interpreters, and some interpreters and translators became farmers. We had many examples. And I think really the farmers, when they speak, really have a stronger voice and are more listened to than the academics. And I did a lot of media work for Via Campesina, and really when the journalist could really interview a farmer, he would get much more interesting material than an academic who speaks about food sovereignty. So I would really encourage all farmers to speak and not try to have a formal official language with a PowerPoint presentation, because that's not what works. What works is the experience that you have and all the learning that you have made from your practice as a farmer, right? So yeah, just that. And then there are 3 questions really for interpreters that I saw. How an interpreter, translator, what do you do when you don't agree with the political decision made in the room? I think it's an interesting question. That's one. The second, about translation, yeah, that's more the work of interpreters, but how you make a fast judgment and quick decision when you do the interpretation work, and how do you avoid to miscommunicate the difference, miscommunicate the message, right? Especially in a political movement. And the third question, how have you shifted to online interpretation, which I have not done, right? So maybe Kate and Lucia, you can jump on those 2 questions or 3.
Do you want to go first? I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
While Lucia is coming off mute, I will answer. Yeah, I can hear you now. In terms of when people say things that I don't agree with politically, I think it's really important to bear in mind that there are, I could agree and disagree with the people who are speaking about some political or ideological or practical things, but for me it is a fundamental, people's right to participate in horizontal organizing processes is a fundamental political principle. So for me, it is really important that I this question of leaving my politics at the door, and I have over the years interpreted many things that I really did not agree with politically, but within movements that I care about a lot, and I believe in the right of everybody in that movement to be able to directly participate, and that the decisions that we build with everybody participating are better than my personal opinions, and they're more important than my personal opinions. Also, I think it's really important to think about the question of trust. So a person who is communicating with a meeting in a language other people in the meeting don't understand is at a big disadvantage, because they have to trust me that I am correctly communicating what they are saying to the other people in the room. And that's a huge responsibility. And when we work with volunteer interpreters, I always think it's very important to stress what a big responsibility it is to be that person's voice in the room. And that's much more important than my personal political opinions. I mean, that is my personal political opinion, I guess.
Well, from a professional point of view, it's like just unthinkable that you would come to say what you think while you're interpreting. I mean, like trained interpreters like are formatted to know that whatever they think about something is really not what is at stake. So that's sometimes when they are in a more informal setting, they tend to stray, but not really often, and I haven't seen it. So for me, it's just that I work for the United Nations, and it doesn't cross my mind to say what I think about what those people are saying, because if I started, I would never stop. So it's just unthinkable.
I've seen a lot of questions going past on the chat about for like what advice do we give for people who are organizing these kinds of meetings. I don't know, like the answer to that is massive. I mean, we have a long book that we want to write. It's inside us and the last 10-15 years of experience, and we need to turn it into a book. But in the meantime, the Coati website has a lot of resources and things that we've, like little things that we've produced over the years that can help. And also you are very welcome to contact us and ask for advice. Like we're always very keen to help people with their multi-language organizing. So yeah, the Coati website is coati.pimienta.org.
We will have to finish soon, as far as I understand. So one thing I would like to say to finish is that
can you? There's someone asking Kate to repeat the Coati web address.
Okay, hold on. I will put it here, and maybe it can be put in the
chat
on the screen.
Sorry, Isabel.
Yeah, no. Okay. Just one piece of advice is to think about languages really from the very, very start of any political process and organizing, because it's something that is part of the political building. It's part of the relationship you build with a broad movement, and it has many technical and human and political and financial implications. So it's not something you plan when you have already organized all your meeting and everything is set. It's part, so start very fast. And yeah, that's very practical, very practical and non-academic advice. So I don't know, Lucia and Kate, if you want to say something to finish.
Really?
I don't know. I mean, somebody was asking about what we've learned from working in the new circumstances online. Like I said, this is for me the first time that I've done it, and I'm doing it as a speaker and not as an interpreter. So I don't really know, but there are interpreters working now who maybe have better ideas. And like I say, there is a technician from Coati who is also working with ORFC on this. And I know a lot of you have ideas about that. So again, contact us and ask, but I don't really have an answer. I'm hoping in-person conferences come back soon.
Lucia, do you want to say anything?
No, not really.
Okay, thank you very much for attending this session. We enjoyed it as well, just to chat about this experience, and we wish you all the best also for your multi-language organizing and participation.
Yeah.
And we're going to stop to give the interpreters a chance to have a break before the next session.
Yeah, thanks to the interpreter.
Bye. Thank you.